Welcome to the Deep Dive. This week, we're looking into virtual reality and the metaverse, maybe some of the less shiny parts.
Yeah, you shared a source. VR Unmasked, the dark side of the metaverse. It's set up like a podcast itself.
Right, with two hosts, Alex and Sam.
Yeah.
One's really into VR, the other maybe a bit more skeptical.
Exactly. And that tension makes it great for our deep dive. We want to pull out their insights on the downsides, things like addiction, exploitation, virtual crime.
See what it all means as this tech grows.
Precisely. Where the potential pitfalls might be.
Okay, so let's jump right in. First up, they talked about addiction. Stuck in the matrix, they called it.
Yeah, which, definitely gets your attention.
It does.
The point was that VR is it's designed to be incredibly immersive. The games, the social stuff, it can all feed into compulsive use.
They had this pretty wild example. Someone spending 72 hours straight in VR chat.
72 hours.
Yeah, like 3 days apparently not eating, not sleeping properly.
Yeah.
Just
Wow. It sounds extreme, but it really illustrates the pull, doesn't it? The source suggested our brains might not fully draw the line between virtual and real sometimes, especially when the virtual rewards, the social interactions, feel more satisfying than real life. That can shift things.
so it becomes preferable.
Potentially, yeah. They even brought up studies comparing it to, like, gambling addiction mechanisms, that same kind of reward loop.
That's a bit concerning. Thinking about how these things could be engineered to hook you.
Right.
And they also mentioned the real world impact, didn't they? Social isolation.
Absolutely. If VR becomes your main source of connection, your real-world relationships, your responsibilities, they can suffer.
You withdraw.
Exactly. Which kind of raises that big question, how do we find a balance? As this stuff gets better and better, how do we keep one foot, firmly planted in reality?
A very good question. Okay, so moving from personal addiction, the source shifted gears to the metaverse economy. Exploitation station.
Yeah, another catchy title, but it points to something real. People are starting to work in VR.
Like actual jobs.
Yeah, virtual fashion designers, people selling virtual real estate, even like bouncers at virtual clubs. It's happening.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But how are they paid? That was the catch, right?
That's the core issue they raised. Often it's in crypto or some kind of in-game currency. And the big problem is
No rules.
pretty much a lack of labor laws, no minimum wage guarantees in a lot of these virtual spaces.
So the problems we have now, just copied over.
Or potentially worse. The source mentioned this report, and it's quite shocking about kids in developing countries, allegedly working like 12-hour days building VR worlds.
12 hours. For how much?
For pay around, maybe $3 an hour.
Wow. Okay. That definitely throws a wrench in the whole digital utopia idea.
It really does. It shows that just because the technology is new, it doesn't automatically erase old problems like exploitation, if anything, without oversight.
Could make them easier to hide.
That's the risk, yeah. It highlights that we need to be thinking about ethics and safeguards right from the start, not just hoping tech solves everything.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, next segment. Virtual crime. Stealing pixels, hurting real people, sounds like something out of a movie.
But it's becoming a reality. They talked about things like avatar assaults.
Assaults, how does that work?
Well, no physical contact, obviously, but the experience, the violation within that virtual space can be genuinely traumatic for the person, psychologically damaging.
Okay.
And then there's NFT heists, virtual identity theft, stuff with real financial consequences.
Right, because those digital items could be worth actual money.
Exactly. They mentioned a case in South Korea, actual legal action for VR harassment. So some places are starting to react.
But it's not widespread.
Not really. The source basically described it as the Wild West still.
Yeah.
Very few established legal frameworks.
A digital frontier, but without the sheriff.
Kind of, yeah. And think about losing valuable assets. They had this funny but serious example. Losing a virtual llama that was someone's life savings.
A virtual llama. Okay.
Sounds silly, but if that digital asset, that NFT or whatever, holds significant real-world value, getting hacked or scammed is devastating.
It brings it home. These aren't just pixels if they represent real investment or savings.
Precisely. And the fundamental problem, the source pointed out, is just how do you police a space with no physical borders, no traditional jurisdiction?
Yeah, where do you even start? Who's in charge?
Big questions. Very few easy answers right now.
It seems like it. Now, they had a listener Q&A bit too, right? VR headline of the week.
Someone asked about the weirdest VR crime.
And the answer was
Quite a story. Apparently, someone in Japan proposed virtually.
Okay.
Then things went sour. They had a virtual divorce. And the ex actually sold the partner's avatar on the black market.
Sold their avatar. Wow.
Yeah. It's sort of darkly funny, but it shows how intertwined our real emotions and finances can get with these virtual identities and possessions.
Oh, no kidding. It really makes you think differently about ownership and relationships online.
Definitely. Which leads into their final question, really. Can we fix the metaverse?
Given all these issues, addiction, exploitation, crime, can we steer it in a better direction?
The source seemed hopeful but cautious. They suggested things like, well, better regulations, obviously.
That seems necessary if complicated.
Very. But also ethical design. Thinking about these problems before they build the worlds. Building in safeguards.
Being proactive, not just reactive.
Exactly. And just general awareness. Users, developers, policymakers, everyone needs to be mindful of these potential dark sides as the tech evolves.
So it's not just about the tech itself, but how we choose to build and use it.
That seems to be the core message.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive pulling apart that VR unmasked source. It definitely highlights some critical things to watch.
Yeah, I think for listeners, the key things to take away are: 1, the real risk of addiction from how immersive this stuff is. 2, the potential for real-world exploitation creeping into these virtual economies if we're not careful.
Right.
And 3, this whole emerging challenge of virtual crime and how unprepared our legal systems still seem to be.
So the big thought to leave everyone with, drawing from the source, is really, as these worlds grow, how do we actively shape them?
How do we make sure they actually benefit people and, try to head off these harms before they become entrenched?
Definitely something to keep thinking about as we see more VR and Metaverse news. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.